Paul is in Bow. Hello, Paul.
Hello there.
Hi.
I'd like to ask, as the opinion polls in Scotland show that it's still roughly the same proportions for independence and for staying part of the UK, in other words, staying part of the UK as at the time of the referendum, and there's no desire for a new referendum in Scotland at the moment. Do you think that the Scottish independence is inevitable, that the opinion will turn in that way, and when do you think that'll be?
Well, I think it is inevitable, as near to inevitable as anything you can have in politics. And the reason I believe that is the politics of the two countries, that's Scotland and England, have been diverging for some time, most recently and most dramatically in the attitude towards Europe.
When did that start, though?
Well, it started in the 1950s. It's a very good BBC programme, if I'm allowed to mention these dreaded initials on LBC, but it was on a Sunday night, which charted some of that divergence, certainly in recent history. And they had some nice shots of me singing as a young man, so I was pleased about that. But nonetheless, there's quite a lot of information. I think particularly for people out with Scotland, there was some really valuable background information before it became headline news. There was things happening in Scotland which were setting a different political temperature. I don't actually agree about the polls. Scotland is effectively split 50-50 on independence at the present moment. There's been 6 polls since the European referendum. 3 of them have shown majorities for independence. 3 of them haven't, but each of them has shown a higher number than the 45% of 2 years ago. The last one was yesterday, which showed 47%. Now, people say, well, would you start a referendum campaign at 47% for yes? I started a referendum campaign in 2012 at 27% for yes. So I wouldn't have thought that's going to be a great inhibition.
It's obviously the second anniversary on Sunday of the referendum, something that I'm not sure whether you look back on very fondly or not.
I was reading today. I was reading what I was doing this very day 2 years ago. I was at the Yes Pop concert in Edinburgh. Apparently it was very good. I'll say it in my diary.
But we are now in the middle of 2016. Do you think that independence could come about within 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? Or even 2 years. I would have thought that it would be wrong and politically unwise to have another referendum until the polls showed that you were 55-60%.
I think there'll be a referendum within the timescale of Brexit. I think
within the next 2 years.
I think the next 2 to 2.5 years, now that they've delayed the invoking the Article 50. I thought that for some time, and I think the only way, if Westminster wants to avoid it, and I was very, very interested in what Nick Clegg said at the Press Gallery lunch yesterday. I don't know if you caught up with that. He said, look, I would find it, this is Nick Clegg, very difficult to argue against independence now, as I did 2 years ago, which I thought was quite a significant statement for the former Deputy Prime Minister. He was one of the Free Amigos, if you remember, who came dashing up to Scotland in the last week.
The vow.
and delivered the vow, exactly.
Paul, what would you like to come back on?
Well, I was going to say, in that case, you see, it looks then as though Scotland is going to be a sort of a permanent disruptive a factor in UK politics. And of course, it's also one which the English now are heavily subsidising. Now, just brief figures from the Herald Scotland indicate that for 2015-16, the public spend in Scotland was £1,200 more per person than in the UK. The tax take was £400 lower, and that's taking account of the share of the gas. So in other words, taking account of oil revenues.
Well, you must have heard these arguments a million times
fairness,
before.
There's only been twice in the last 30 years where the tax take in Scotland hasn't been more than the UK average, and that's the last 2 years, Paul. And equally, it could be only twice in the next 30 years. Can I just say to you that the arguments for independence and economic arguments don't stand on whether the balance sheet is in surplus or deficit at any one point in time. It's whether independence will impact on the rate of growth in Scotland, will make Scotland a more successful country. If you've got a successful growing country and you start with a deficit, it's not a problem. Equally, of course, if you start with a surplus and pursue a range of bad policies and slow down your growth, like withdrawing from the European Union, then even if you start with a surplus, you end up with a deficit. So the argument for independence rests on whether or not independence will impact positively on Scotland's economy and rate of growth. I think it will. But I think to argue, well, maybe as Nick Clegg said yesterday, to seriously argue that a country with the rich variety of natural resources and human resources of Scotland couldn't be independent it's not really a credible argument.
I'm not sure anybody's argument it couldn't be independent. It's just what the advantages or disadvantages might be. Now, you can, of course, watch us live on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk or the Facebook page. And do give us a call, 0345 6060973, if you'd like to ask Alec a question.
There was one more point about looking back to this day 2 years ago, about 4 days before the referendum. I say that the opinion polls are of no help. There was 3 polls published that day. One showed yes ahead, one showed no ahead, and one showed a dead heat.
And that's probably why there was such a big turnout, because people knew that every vote would count.
Well, I think that's part of it, certainly.
Right, let's move on to a text from Annie in Dunfermline. I support Dunfermline Athletic in Scotland, by the way. Do you think it's a disgrace how Pauline Cafferkey has been treated after she risked her life for people suffering from Ebola? She deserves a medal, not a misconduct inquiry, doesn't she?
Yes. I think Annie's on to something very strong. I mean, I was involved as First Minister in the decision to facilitate the volunteers from the National Health Service in England and Scotland to go out to Africa to help with the Ebola crisis. And I have to say, I mean, then and now, I have nothing but admiration for people who put their own lives on the line. Now, I've had a look at the misconduct inquiry. She's been cleared today. Pauline Cafferkey has been cleared. And the both in terms of the judgment and in terms of the argument put forward by Pauline's own legal representative, I think they speak for everybody. I mean, for example, her legal representative said to the inquiry, she willingly put her life at risk to travel to Sierra Leone to work as a volunteer helping to treat people suffering from Ebola. She and hundreds of other volunteers played a vital role in saving lives and helping to curb the epidemic in extremely challenging circumstances. Now, I think that person speaks for public opinion on this. The inquiry makes it clear that at no point in bringing her before the inquiry did they take into account the effects of the illness on her judgment.
Should this ever have been brought in the first place?
No, it shouldn't. And we should have, I mean, yes, of course, there has to be discipline procedures in the National Health Service as any other profession. That's part of professional conduct. But you have to make allowances for the circumstances, and I'm glad and delighted. Listen, David Cameron, we were talking about earlier on, he would have done himself a lot more good that instead of making all these awards to his donors and cronies, he'd thought about giving an award to Pauline Cafferkey and the others who put their lives on the line in Sierra Leone.